Hello and welcome to e-lectures. Today, let's discuss the essay of studies written by Francis Bacon. This is an essay prescribed for the semester 3 students of the University of Kerala, and this comes under the paper British Literature 1. To begin with, let's take a quick look at the Renaissance writer Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon, his time period is from 1561 to 1626. He's a philosopher, scientist, and essayist. His career covers both the Elizabethan and the Jacobean eras. He's a pioneer of essay form and is known as the father of essay in English. He's referred to as the Renaissance man because in his works we can see the questioning spirit, the humanism, and the religious dilemma of the English Renaissance times. He wrote both in Latin and in English. Even though Bacon wished to be known for his Latin works, he is now remembered only for his works in English. He enjoyed the patronage of Earl of Essex. He advocated empiricism. According to Bacon, sensory experience is the best source of knowledge. He supported scientific revolution of the late Renaissance. His important works are essays, The Advancement of Learning, Novum Organum, and The New Atlantis. Alexander Pope called him the wisest, brightest, meanest of mankind. Let's take a look at the features of Bacon's essays. He adopted the term essay from French writer Montaigne. While Montaigne wrote the informal essay, Bacon wrote the formal. Montaigne laid the highest emphasis on the self, but Bacon was detached, objective, and studied the world rather than the self. His essays are quintessence of practical wisdom. The situations are taken from everyday life. He wrote on topics that are familiar to us, like studies, friendship, love, truth, etc. He mastered epigrammatic style or aphoristic style that present finished ideas rather than develop and explore them. He employs aphorisms, which are brief sentences containing rich ideas. He wrote to inform young men of his class rather than engaging in self expression. He used Latin phrases and figures of speech like simile, metaphor, etc. to make his ideas more effective in his essays. Critic Hallam declared that it would be derogatory to a man of the slightest claim to polite letters to be unacquainted with Bacon's essays. Let's take a look at the background of the essay of studies. The essay of studies is taken from Bacon's work Essays, which is subtitled Counsels, Civil and Moral. It is published in 3 editions. The 1597 edition contains 10 essays. 1612 edition comprises 38 essays, and 1625 edition contains 58 essays. About essays, Bacon wrote, I do now publish my essays, which of all my works have been most current, for that, as it seems, they come home to men's business and bosoms. Of studies is about education, which was a newly developing area in the Renaissance period. Education was an important preoccupation of Renaissance gentlemen. How to study, what to study, and how to use studies were the important aspects of a gentleman during the Renaissance time. During Renaissance period, a person called Castiglione wrote a book with the title The Courtier. The book actually taught people manners and the nature of graceful behavior. The courtier gives the complete education of the gentleman. So from all this we can understand that education was an important preoccupation of Renaissance gentlemen. This essay embodies a few dispersed meditations. The reflections and observations are in the form of advice for living a successful life. Let's begin the essay. In the beginning, Bacon enumerates 3 different uses of education. Studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability. So the 3 different uses according to Bacon are: firstly, it gives pleasure to a man or it delights a man when he is retired or when he is alone. When you read a book when you're alone, that kind of reading gives you delight. Secondly, studies decorates your speech. It acts as ornament when you have conversation with others. It adds charm to your speech. From books, we get materials like quotations, proverbs, comparisons with which we can decorate our speech. Thirdly, studies gives you the ability to make correct judgments and to manage practical affairs. Studies enable the man to develop an ability to make correct judgments in his daily affairs and teaches him to manage all his daily affairs perfectly well. Bacon moves on to say that expert men means men whose knowledge is based on experience, men with worldly experience. Such people, they can carry out plans and understand particular circumstances. But men who are learned or men who study, they are better in planning and arranging ideas effectively, according to Bacon. Then he moves on to say how not to use education. According to Bacon, to spend too much time in studies is sloth, means too much studying leads to laziness. If we use our knowledge too often in conversation with others, then you are just showing off. It could be considered as vain display of your learning. To be guided solely by your studies is a sign of an eccentric scholar, according to Bacon. If you take decisions based on the knowledge you acquired from books, then you are an eccentric scholar that rather than being a practical man who is concerned about realities of life. That's a view of Bacon. So from all this, Bacon is trying to say that there should be a moderation in the pursuit of education. One can't rely only on books for complete knowledge. Education should be supplemented by experience. Education and experience should go hand in hand. Education without experience does not make you a practical man. Bacon goes on to say that a person's natural abilities are enhanced by education or natural abilities are improved by education. But education without worldly experience is too vague in general. It will not make you ready to deal with the outside world. And he used a simile to explain this. Natural abilities are compared to a natural plant using a simile. Just as trimming helps a plant to grow in shape, education shapes and develops the natural abilities of a man. But hey, as I told you, education without experience is too vague and general, and hence knowledge gained from books should be complemented and corrected by experience. Then he moves on to explain how to use studies. Bacon classifies men as crafty, simple, and wise according to the way they view studies. So he states attitude of different people to studies. First group of people include cunning men who have worldly experience. They disregard education. They think that experience they have acquired from the world is enough for them to make a living, and hence they ignore studies. The second group is stupid people or illiterate or uneducated people. They admire education. They look at studies with awe as if it is something they can't acquire in their lifetime. The third group of people are wise men. They are the ones who makes the best use of education. They perfect their knowledge by blending education with practical experiences or experiences they've acquired from the world. Then Bacon goes on to say that read not to contradict and confute. According to Bacon, a man should read not to argue unnecessarily with people to confuse them. A man should never read to think that whatever he reads is always correct. A man should not believe everything he reads. He should not assume that education always leads to correct behavior or understanding. Thirdly, a man should read not to use education merely to focus on conversation with others. But for what should education be used for? Why should you read? A man should read to develop his critical thinking and his reasoning power. Then he moves on to say how to use books. Here, books are compared to food using metaphor. According to Bacon, some books are to be tasted. Such books should be read only in a cursory manner. Only some parts of such books will be worthy to be read. Then he moves on to say that some books are to be swallowed. Such books are to be read fully without paying much attention. That is, you should read the entire book, but you can read through it very quickly. Then he moves on to say that there are few books which are to be chewed and digested. Such books should be read entirely with full attention and understanding. He goes on to give more tips on how to read books. Some books can be read by others who take notes, and the notes or the summary can substitute for reading an entire book. But these books should not deal with some important subject, because abridged versions of books or summaries of books are like distilled waters, both tasteless and hence uninteresting. Here also he employs a simile. Then he moves on to give us the results of education. According to Bacon, reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. Reading creates a well-rounded man. Studies enriches a man's mind with knowledge. Conversation or discussion makes a man precise and quick-witted. Writing makes a man capable of thinking with logic and reason. Then he goes on to say that if a man doesn't write very much, he should have a good memory to compensate for not writing. If a man doesn't exercise the art of conversation, he needs to have a quick wit. If a man doesn't read very much, he has to be able to pretend that he knows more than he does. Towards the end of the essay, he gives you the scope of different disciplines and their impacts. History makes men wise. Poetry makes men clever and imaginative. Mathematics makes men intellectually sharp. Philosophy makes men profound or deep. Logic and rhetoric makes men skilled to assert their arguments. Then he gives us a Latin phrase, abuent studia in mors, which means studies mold character, or studies pass into character. According to Bacon, there is no problem of the mental faculties that cannot be fixed by appropriate study or discipline. As the right physical exercise cures bodily diseases, the right discipline can fix the problems of our mental faculties. Physical exercises like bowling is good for kidney ailments, shooting is good for lungs, walking is good for stomach, riding is good for head. So just like that, the problems of mental faculties can be fixed by disciplines or any subjects. Then he goes on to say that if one lacks concentration, go and study mathematics. If one cannot distinguish between ideas, you have to study the medieval philosophers because they tend to argue over minor details. If one cannot consider matters quickly, go and study law. So ultimately, Bacon is trying to say that every defect of mind can be cured by some form of study. To conclude, I would say that this is an essay typical of Francis Bacon, which has a string of aphorisms sparkling with wit as well as luminous wisdom. Here I quote Alexander Pope to characterize Bacon's writings. What oft was thought, but never so well expressed. Thank you so much for your patient listening.